Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. At this time, I'd like to call the July 9th Planning Board meeting to order. May I ask everyone to stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any members? Do any members have any conflicts of interest with respect to any of the items on the agenda tonight? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, I believe we have a quorum with 5 people. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Agenda is approved. Are there any changes to the June 11th minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the June 11 minutes.
So moved.
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Minutes of the June 11 meeting are approved. Is there any old business tonight? Hearing none, moving on to new business. PB 19-13 Currituck County Text Amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 2, Administration, Chapter 6, Subdivision and Infrastructure Improvements, and Chapter 10, Definitions and Measurements to limit minor subdivisions to those without significant infrastructure improvements, i.e. road installed to NCDOT standards, fire hydrant, fire pond. It will also limit minor subdivisions from stripping out along existing NCDOT maintained roads. This text amendment does not apply to family subdivisions, a type of minor subdivision. Ms. Glaive?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So why are we looking at this text amendment? There's several reasons. The first of which, the Board of Commissioners had a retreat in January of this year, and they directed staff to address the increasing use of minor subdivisions, and I should state first, this does not change anything with family subdivisions. But for minor subdivisions and the potential safety impact of those minor subdivisions stripping out along existing roadways. One of the other changes that's being captured with this text amendment, in 2017, the Department of Insurance changed the way that the NC Fire Code was interpreted. To that point, minor subdivisions were not captured and not required to meet the fire code standards. They now are. So at 3 or more lots, you could be looking at potentially installing a road to state standards. You could be looking at installing a fire hydrant or a fire pond, just that more significant infrastructure than was previously required. With all of that new infrastructure that's required with 3 or more lots, it is necessary for this to go from just a staff review or administrative review to what we call our technical review committee. That's where your experts sit and review these things. We're talking about building inspectors, our acting fire marshal, and probably 10 or 12 other state and county agencies. We're also capturing in this text amendment a general statute change. To sum that change up, it talks about being allowed to divide lots through will or settling an estate, and it clarifies that while you can divide those lots, they are not necessarily legal lots of record that you can get a building permit with. You would still have to go through the proper subdivision process and install the necessary infrastructure and meet subdivision regulations to be able to pull a building permit for those lots. I'm going to give you just a few random examples throughout the county of what we're talking about with minor subdivision lots, stripping out along existing DOT roads. The lots that you see, I don't know if you can see my arrow, the lighter color that's shaded, this is Baxter Lane. The lots that are that lighter color, they were all developed as minor subdivision lots that later came in and did a major subdivision and put the roads in and accessed off those internal roads. So you're putting, instead of just having one road in with all of the lots accessing off of a road, you're stripping the lots off and putting driveway accesses along those existing roads. This one is Pointer Road. And the lots that you see that are darker shade of green, they were all minor subdivision lots that were cut out along Pointers Road instead of having to internally access those lots. This is Tulse Creek Road, and each of these lots was developed as minor subdivision lots. This is East Ridge Road. This is a rather unique subdivision, in my experience, anyways. I'll call it the white lots that you see are your minor subdivision lots. So you're looking at 5 minor subdivision lots, and then all of these dark green lots that you see, they are what we call, you've heard us talk about 10-acre exempt lots, where they're exempt from subdivision regulations if they're over 10 acres. So I'm going to, a wild guess, maybe an 800-foot section of East Ridge Road, and you've just put probably 10 or more driveways there. And it's just a safety issue that is the primary driver for this. This is one that was proposed on Jarvis Road, same thing. 3 lots, 3 minor subdivision lots would be created, and then the major would happen on this residual after these minor subdivision lots were cut out. Minor subdivisions would have to, it would be two lots. Actually, you could do 3 lots. So 2 or 3 lots, you would have to install what we call a private access street. And if you look in your staff report, you'll see some drawings that shows what a private access street is. Basically, it's an improved gravel access to these minor subdivision lots. You would be required to install that private access street for minor subdivisions and access that internal street or private access street, and not be allowed to strip the lots out along existing streets. And just to clarify, this would also cover major subdivisions as well. If you have an existing lot that has an existing driveway, you want to divide that a couple of more times and put in the road to those, let's say behind it, put 2 lots behind it. The existing driveway would have to be removed, and the existing lot would also have to access that private access way. The drawing that I referenced shows the change, and this is picked up from Fire Code, from a 16-foot wide improved surface to a 20-foot wide improved road width, which increases the overall width of a private access street right away from 20 to 24 feet. And one of the other things you'll see in definition section is that we clarify the definition of minor subdivision as well as defined infrastructure. In your packet, I won't read them to you, but you'll see the staff findings for each of the criteria in the UDO. Staff is recommending approval of this because it's consistent with the land use plan, and those policies mentioned here, HN4 and CA1, are spelled out in your packet. The request is reasonable and in the public interest because a higher level of review is required for subdivisions installing that significant infrastructure that we talked about. And it requires our technical review committee to look at this and not just approved by staff alone. Limiting driveway cuts along existing road prevents the traffic function of the road and preserves the traffic function of the road and minimizes traffic accidents. And to have a higher quality development, it's important to mandate internal streets at more than 2 lots. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions for staff? You mentioned major subdivisions are included too. Is that even if the commissioners approve something different? I mean, how does that work with the major subdivisions as well?
What this captures with the proposed text amendment, when it talks about lots, and that will be, I'll read it to you here. It states that lots would not be allowed to strip out along existing streets, and that means a minor subdivision cannot do that, nor a major subdivision could do that, because there are some majors that'll try to strip the lots out along the road and then bring a road in and get more access that way. So it would capture all subdivisions from being able to strip out those lots.
I was just wondering if there's a way that if the commissioners thought that somebody proposed a major subdivision with a couple lots facing the street, and they thought that would suffice, they can still approve that?
They would have to amend the ordinance to be able to approve that.
Is there a way to leave a door open for them to, for the commissioners to, on a conditional basis, say that that's okay? I don't know.
I don't know of a way to do it because the purpose of the amendment is to not allow that, so I'm not sure how to allow it sometime. I'm not-
Right. Well, I was just saying maybe a road that doesn't have very much traffic on it. And they still thought it was all right, but I understand. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, I'll open the floor for public comment if there's anyone who wishes to speak on this item tonight. Come on up, Mr. Miller.
Good evening. My name is Sam Miller. I reside at 147 Sanderson Court. And I have an example exactly what we're talking about, Mr. Balance, relative to that. We recently have developed a subdivision at the Sanderson Court street. It's previously a shell sand path. We've improved it. We've gone through the major subdivision process. We've installed water, fiber optics, power. We've prepared the road bed, installed a NCDOT ready roadway. In the process of doing that, based on the geography of the land that we owned, and we could pull a plat up and show you, it was appropriate such that we could prepare Sanderson Court to be a NCDOT road. We've done the coring, the samples, we've done that. We've actually even submitted petition, gone through the commissioners, and filed the petition with the county. It's currently with North Carolina Department of Transportation, ready to go to General Assembly for adoption of Sanderson Court as an NCDOT roadway. As soon as that road's adopted, let me digress and revert back a little bit. Currently, there are lots 1 through 6 that have driveways on Sanderson Court. There are also lots 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, as well as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 existing homes. Those are all on NCDOT road. When we prepare an NCDOT roadway for a subdivision, it's prepared to a standard. It doesn't matter whether you have 400 homes, 100 homes, 15 homes, or in this case, approximately 15, 19, depending on how you count it, homes that actually border that street. Now there's a thoroughfare of that street, which would be, Sanderson runs from the west to the east. It runs dead into the sound, turns 90 degrees, it parallels the sound, there's some sound front lots. If you have the GIS up, Tammy, if you could do that, I'd be glad to show the example exactly. You could use the address of 101 Sanderson Court to pull up the GIS so I can demonstrate this pictorially. Currently, there's 33 approximate acres to the north of that property that borders it that we're looking at developing. And with this amendment, precluding minor as well as major subdivisions, it was okay to put 19 homes on there with driveways onto that street, and it'd be okay to construct a new subdivision where we put 200 homes onto a street to that standard. Again, this isn't a major thoroughfare like Puddin Ridge, Talls Creek Road, Pointers Road, Guinea Mill, Guinea Road. You pick. It doesn't really matter. It's not that type of thing. This is a road we constructed. And on that northern side, there's a section there where we imagine we would probably, if you will, strip out another 10 lots. But if you were to design this, and I had an engineering company design this, and nothing was there, that's exactly how they would design it. So I think the intent of what we're doing probably has some good merit, and I support it on some fronts. You know, it doesn't make sense to strip lots out on Talls Creek Road. It doesn't make sense to do it on, Dozier, Pointers, Guinea, Puddin Ridge, and probably numerous others. So I get the intent of it, but I think we're causing problems with some other things where we don't want to cause those inefficiencies of it. So if you look at Sanderson, that picture is just fine, actually, just like that, Ms. Glaive, or Tammy, if I may. If you look on that northern portion, you see the 1, 2, 3, 4 rectangular blocks that run east to west. That's first rectangular block there is actually the first 6 lots. When it turns from green to brown is now when the property changes. So that brown section that runs where you see the trees that run all the way to the sound is where we'd be stripping out another 7, 8 lots. With this amendment, as Ms. Glaive just described, you could no longer do that because this road will be an NCDOT road. It was okay to put 19 houses on it, and it's not a major traffic road. It's got a cul-de-sac in the end. I just think we're missing something here. This is a very black and white example to me of why we maybe need to adjust that language, and we're maybe not ready the way we've written the text amendment just yet. I think it makes sense in a lot of cases, but when you have an existing subdivision and you're expanding off a newly constructed subdivision street, so we'd want to put another street off of there that we would prepare to DOT standards, that we would prepare to NCDOT to incur more costs because they're going to maintain that stuff. And that's going to happen through our tax dollars and through our road taxes and our fuel taxes and everything else. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm an engineer, and it's like, why would we do that? We create no traffic hazard in that situation whatsoever. So there's an example where a major subdivision should be allowed to do it. To your question, Mr. Balance, you asked that kind of perfectly, but it plays right into that example, and I was thinking about that because we have that property that we're planning to develop. Does anybody have any question about that point?
Any questions?
How old is the road that's there now, Sanderson Road?
We just tore it. Well, the road, I couldn't tell you exactly how old it is, Ms. Kraus, but it's been there for probably, guesstimate, 15 years as a shell path, always with the intention of this being developed. There's actually a book written that has this exact tract of land that I have in my house that shows the development of this, which is that individual actually has created a lot of the UDO development standards that we've adopted today for conservation subdivisions. So it actually literally shows us this is a pictorial example developing these tracts of land with homes down the sides of that street. And we've taken and developed that from a shell sand path to an NCDOT right-of-way, and we did that between November and I would say April of this year, November of last year and April of this year. So this has really only been a DOT road for a short period. But it gets lost in definition on this point when we say a DOT roadway. Well, if we leave it a private road, then we can do that. But as soon as we send it to the state and we qualify this as a DOT roadway, now it can no longer be stripped. When that's how you would design it if it was a subdivision. You have a road, you would put houses on it. I talk with my hands, so.
So basically, that road it's not a throughway.
No, it's not.
It's just a road.
It's a
that's
subdivision
actually
road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The road is the subdivision.
You're familiar with subdivisions. Think of it as a phasing plan. Let's say that northern section was phase 2, essentially. We just didn't acquire it yet. Now we have acquired it, and we'd want to expand on that. So instead, we'd want to put another road in, and then we'd want to make another HOA, and we'd want to make another community when we could just build on what we have existing. It doesn't make sense. I think if there's certain roads that maybe we wanted to cite that say, hey, this doesn't make sense, but if you're expanding on it, and some of the other ones that we saw in some of the examples that were used as well, if you were building off of those, it's the same situation. And literally, why would you do that? There's cases when we developed Laurel Woods Estates where we had phases, and with that, you might not be able to be those phases depending on how you may interpret it, because on one side of the street we may have had houses, but we didn't put the stormwater retention in place on the other side of the street. It happened on Bayleaf Drive when I developed Laurel Woods Estates. So by definition, if I made that a DOT street before I did phase 2, I shouldn't be able to put those lots there because that would be stripping out along an existing NCDOT right-of-way. So within a subdivision, somehow that needs to be said. That's one of the first points I wanted to make. I do think it's a good idea in some instances. I'm not saying that this is a bad idea, but I think in some instances it doesn't make sense based on that one definition there. And we probably need to do some more tweaking with it as well. This is actually, until a few days ago, this has been the first that I've had a chance to review it and actually comment on it. And this is what I do for a living. I'm a developer. So we build subdivisions, we do those sorts of things, and we see the impact of it. But I do also live in the community, so I see the impact of, you can't put a driveway on every street every 10 feet either. A couple of the other questions I had about was, we still leave the family subdivision piece in place. And that's great, but the family subdivision definition is a bit elusive. I have a big family. My wife has, including her, be 11 brothers and sisters. I do not want to live next to all of my wife's brothers and sisters. I love them to death, but sometimes you need a little space between family. And, in a family subdivision, the question I've always asked is, maybe there should be some expansion of that to say, for instance, if you were to buy your property and you wanted to subdivide it, if you were residing on one of the lots that was being subdivided, does that qualify you as a family subdivision rather than saying that every lot that's subdivided must be owned by a family member? Because it really just doesn't make sense. I think if you looked in your heart of hearts, you probably wouldn't want your mom and your dad and your spouse's mom and dad and your brothers and your sisters and everybody to live exactly alongside you. A little space is sometimes nice. But if you had some acreage, it might be nice to have a little bit of flexibility where maybe you found something nice and you said, this is really where I'd like to build my retirement home. As long as you owned one of those and built a house on one of those, you could subdivide under the family subdivision rule without having to sell it to all family members. It's a bit restrictive. So maybe we could work a little bit and be a little less restrictive on that piece for people while still being able to protect the safety in the roadways and the health and welfare and those types of things. The other thing I noticed in here too is that if you produce this, you have to do the gravel path. And correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but if you're not allowed to actually put a DOT road in. So say, if anybody's ever lived on a gravel path or a gravel roadway, it's expensive to maintain it. You got to make sure you have the machinery to drag it and keep it straight and fix it. And then everybody's got to chip in, and you got to have a shared driveway agreement. And then you got to make sure gravel gets put down, and there's always somebody who's short of money or, has an issue with it, or, Bobby has a tractor, why can't you just do it, and it's a bit of a social issue. If they had the money, why couldn't they put a DOT road in and qualify? But under this, it says that you can't do a DOT road in a minor subdivision, the way I read it. Is that correct?
If you are putting in significant infrastructure, like an NCDOT road, you would then be a major subdivision, and you could do that with the 2 or 3 lots.
But you'd be major then at that point. You couldn't do it as a minor process. So, I think maybe some flexibility on that might make sense when somebody's actually doing those pieces. I know TRC and those sorts of things, staff is definitely intelligent enough to review the health, the safety, and those sorts of things. When we have, our fire marshal or acting fire marshal in, and we have somebody from the water department if we've run water back there, and also just general staff. I know the 3 ladies here are very intelligent, in what's required and have a lot of experience. I think that it's something that could be done at a minor level rather than always going to the commissioners and making it a much more laborious process. They've got a lot of stuff to do. It'd be nice if we could create some efficiency that way too.
And just to be clear, subdivisions of 20 or less do not go to the commissioners. They go to the technical review committee unless one of the public facilities is approaching capacity.
How many or less?
20 or less.
So that still qualifies even though under this directive. So it would still only require TRC if you want to put a DOT right-of-way in a minor subdivision?
Right.
We'd still be able to.
If you're putting a DOT road in, you are then a major subdivision.
It would be
Right, but you could
classified
still do that
major,
if you're
but it
under.
Would not go to the commissioners.
Right.
Right.
Unless one of the public facilities that we track is approaching capacity.
Gotcha.
Okay. That's probably my biggest issue with it, is really what it has an impact to some of the existing roads and the expenses on it. I get the pieces, and we can argue over the numbers, whether it should be 5 or 3 or 2. It'd be nice to have something a little bit more flexible where maybe you could have 3 lots and the parent parcel remain, so essentially 4 if you would. And that if there was some rewrite or adjustment for those pieces, because under that, even if I did a major subdivision, we'd literally be putting more streets in. Now, granted, we'll still have to put streets in, but it'd be a whole lot more efficient to use that thoroughfare that is not a major arterial or thoroughfare. I don't know how else to define it or describe it, but it just doesn't make sense to me. But I do have a lot of respect for these ladies. They do a good job, and they do know what they're talking about. But we all have differences of opinion, so that's all I'm trying to express with you tonight.
All right. Well, thank you. Did anyone else have any more questions for Mr. Miller? Mr. Bissell? You're next.
Hi, Mark Bissell. I just kind of wanted to echo one of the points that Sam Miller was just making by showing you another example. And the issue that I have is, and I'm going to pass out a subdivision that we're working on so you can get a good picture of what I'm talking about. The top map is just a vicinity map so you can kind of get an overview of where this property is. And
We can share one.
anyway, this is a piece of land over in Jarvisburg, and you can see it's a dead-end road. You can see that there's a label on it called site with an arrow pointing to it. And this is on Fisher Landing Road, which is a dead-end road and has just a few vacant parcels of land beyond it, a couple of houses. And we've been out working on the site and seen maybe one car go by in an hour. So it's a road that has very low traffic. And the second sheet shows a 5-lot subdivision, minor subdivision that has been proposed. It has 1,865 feet of frontage on an existing DOT road, and the land is fairly shallow. It's only 500 and some feet deep. But if this amendment were adopted, the developer would have to build another road parallel to the existing DOT road in order to develop these lots, and it really wouldn't make economic sense. So while I do think that an amendment is needed, I don't think it should apply to all DOT roads. I think that there should be exceptions where you have roads that have very little traffic, that and a property configuration such as this, where it's really not conducive to putting in interior roads, both from a practical standpoint and from an economic standpoint. It really makes sense, I think, to have some exceptions. Also, if you do adopt something similar to what we're talking about, I think you should have an effective date so that people such as my client here, who are in the process and have already invested money in doing this kind of a subdivision, would have the ability to complete it. But I also think you should have exceptions. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Bissell?
Mr. Balance, you might have
Yes.
one more point to make, if I may.
Sure.
Relative to the family subdivision piece as well, we do reside in what we often like to refer to as a rural community, and we try to keep it in a rural fashion as well. Having some lessened restrictions relative to the family requirements for a family subdivision, or maybe it could be one individual retains ownership of that residual for a number of years or builds a house on it of their own that they reside in, might be a nice definition piece. And it might also benefit some of our farming community. This has not been a great year for farming, as you know, with tariffs and taxes and different things that have occurred relative to some of our world trade. It's making it difficult for some individuals in that community. And some option with some of these things is to, at times, sell some land, a few acres here or there in a minor subdivision like this does provide a fair amount of financial flexibility for someone who may be up against a wall due to some economic conditions that they didn't really create themselves. So just consider that, if you would, in some of your decisions as well, and how there may be some flexibility for that too.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this issue? All right, hearing none. So is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple of questions of staff. And I understand exactly what they're saying, that you've got a major throughway is different than a road that's basically a dead end. They're both NC DOT maintained. Is there any way to put stipulations on traffic patterns or the amount of traffic that goes on a road, or what type of road it is?
You can absolutely add conditions like that. Say if it's a dead-end road with,
Traffic, I fully understand what you're trying to do, and, but this has come definitely,
Yeah, because what they're talking about isn't a safety issue, as Tulls Creek Road would be when you're talking about
Absolutely, I
a road
fully
that has
understand
5 or
that.
6 houses on it. It's-
As it stands now, we're really, to vote it this way, I would have a problem with it because I think you're taking land away from people that they won't be able to access in any way other than farming.
It's too limiting if they were able
Very, I
to
agree.
separate whether it's a major thoroughfare
Mhm.
to a rural thoroughfare, but yet DOT managed or
There
or
are
labeled.
I'm sorry, there are already restrictions to major thoroughfare regarding access. But those are your, the Currituck Highway and some of the other more intense roads.
Like Tolls Creek Road is one that we have access control on. 34 and Shortcut Road, some of the more heavily traveled, we do have that type of restrictions on access. We can look at something, either calling out specific roads that we don't want to see this happen on, maybe something along the lines of East Ridge, one of those types, or maybe set a standard for no more than a certain number of annual average daily trip, ADT, that we can get that information from DOT on. Those maps are updated every couple of years with the amount of traffic the DOT roads carry.
I don't think we could really pick out roads because as they're building in their DOT, roads are coming in. So I like the idea of the traffic, more of a traffic gauge rather than picking roads.
Yeah, because if we have a traffic gauge, that can evolve.
Right.
Because
Right,
it
and that-
can
yes,
change
if it gets
in
busy,
10
then
years down the
it's-
road, then we
yes.
know it's a problem as
Right.
opposed to just picking a particular road.
Right.
Right, because keep this in mind, looking at the example here, Tolls Creek Road is a controlled, limited access road. And this was allowed with that control measure on, so ADT may be a much better way to approach it.
Would you,
There's also some road definitions too, like Sanderson, that's technically a subdivision road. Those roads may need to be listed as, regardless of traffic count, they're exempt. Because like, if you were to expand on Sanderson as a subdivision road by definition, that's what it should be. You should put houses on it. At some point, you have to put them on a road, and that's the type of road you want to put driveways on. So subdivision roads maybe should not be restricted from minor subdivisions like that. Maybe only certain areas should be. You know, I think it's less about the number, you know, the number of 5 was probably fine. It's just a question of where you do it. It still may be okay to do 5, but if you did 5 on Sanderson Court, no one in the world would ever know the difference except the 5 people that live there and the other 19 that live in the subdivision. You know, it just,
would you like to take 30 days and adjust some of the language on these streets?
That's entirely up to the direction of the board. Now, just to be clear, and I may have misunderstood, the change from 5 lots to 3 lots would still, that, where the fire code kicks in, that still has to happen because that's a Department of Insurance.
I think we're
fire code
referring more
issue.
to the stripping out along the highway.
Yeah.
The other part seems
Do
to
you
be
have, how do we do that? You've got the little trip generator.
fine. We can
How do
try
you-
to include that in a motion tonight. I'm scared we would not get it correct to your liking, so I'd rather try to take some time and get the language
Yeah,
right.
for this.
And I feel like I need a little bit more direction because I don't know what
Okay.
what that means when it comes to, we can base it on average daily traffic count, but there's got to be a measurement
And maybe this
there.
is where we'll bring some information back to you with some information on like the average, the counts for things like Tolls Creek, East Ridge, some of the roads that we know that this could be an issue, and maybe there and some of the local streets that Mr. Miller is referring to, like what we consider neighborhood streets, and
Compared
some of
to a
those, and compare
subdivision
and see if
street,
there's a
right.
threshold that you all maybe are comfortable with.
Okay.
If that.
We can do
if
that.
you'd like to collaborate on it, I'd be willing to collaborate with you. Just call me. You got my
Okay.
number.
We can do that.
And possibly some flexibility. I don't know if that's needed with the major subdivision criteria. I understand totally the
Well, that's-
adding the limitations to a minor.
So continue to allow major subdivisions to strip out?
No, I'm just wondering, maybe we could explore flexibility for the commissioners to give allowances in certain circumstances, such as what Mr. Miller presented, an addition of a street off of an already existing street, but it was not originally platted, so that would be
But
something different.
It wouldn't go before the commissioners unless you,
Well, it's, if we did that
it would go
subdivision,
through
we could do-
TRC.
We could do 23 lots over there maybe, in that area. So we would be over the threshold, we have to go. to
Maybe that language isn't needed.
But if we did less than that, you know, we couldn't put any of those along Sanderson Court once it became a DOT street. So I think, you know, major subdivision should be allowed if it's, you could word it to something effective, if it's a subdivision street, regardless of, you know, because each street has a classification. You know, you have major thoroughfares, you have secondary roads, you have secondary artillery, you have, you know, subdivision streets. Subdivision streets, there should be
Under
no problem.
certain conditions, it would be allowed on a major subdivision, but maybe only if you met certain conditions.
Help me, what would those conditions be?
A neighborhood street or a subdivision street, not a,
We don't have,
Already.
in our, by
What's the difference with
definition,
side
we don't
roads?
have anything called a neighborhood street or subdivision street. And just keep in mind the big picture too, because that street's potentially going to interconnect with another street, potentially interconnect with another street, like you see in Moyoc when you see all the streets that are interconnected there.
But DOT has definitions of that, though. We don't. DOT defines all the streets that way. That's a DOT.
For local, whether they're local or collectors or major thoroughfares, minor thoroughfares, things like that, DOT does, yes.
I guess I'm unclear on what condition would make it okay to strip some lots out and what would not. What direction? Give me.
I
a
would
little
like
more.
to see flexibility to leave that open for the commissioners to make that decision of whether they think it's feasible to put lots in that area or not. With it not being encouraged, but if it makes sense, and then the commissioners have the ability to approve it. They have the ability to hear it, at least anyway.
You would have to help me. I don't know how to ask the question I'm asking.
Maybe staff will need to confer and try to see how.
Is that a conditional zoning situation?
I mean, it depends on what the applicant's requesting.
Yeah.
If they're requesting a conditional zoning or a preliminary plat, it would be, it's generally not a good planning practice to have subjective policies that can be applied at random.
I'm guessing we're leaning towards still allowing them in major subdivisions. And then if it were still allowed to strip out along a highway on a major subdivision, they would not be able to do it on the restricted access streets.
They would.
They
I mean,
would?
Look at Tolls Creek Road, the example I just gave you. That's allowed right now. Those,
Under a
Eight.
major
yeah,
subdivision?
those 8 lots would be allowed, they are compliant with the restricted access standards.
I personally believe that it's a blanket, and while that, it may not be, I think that it's very restrictive to bringing this to my point. Before we went in this and before they came up to speak, I was completely on board with saying, okay, but this is brought to my attention that we're taking away property rights of something that, if we're talking, if it's truly about safety, there is no safety concern with this particular, and they would not be able, with the language as written, be able to proceed forward with this because of the DOT road. So I think that we do need to find a way to not be, to consider the safety, because that is number one, but also to make sure that we're not taking away property rights, that,
You would still
Right,
have a
of-
right to develop your property. It may not be as profitable because you won't get as many lots, but I think saying that you would take away rights
oh, okay,
might be a little extreme.
okay. This particular layout here, they're one's 5 acres, one's 3 acres.
It looks like the smallest one, 3 acres.
It's like taking
So
away.
you're saying
develop-
that now the 10 acres, it wouldn't make a difference, is that correct? Because
10
that-
acres are exempt from subdivision regulations, so they continue to strip out. We can't regulate that. General statute does not allow us to regulate
So
10 acre
could
subdivision.
could this actually be forcing the 10-acre parcels because they wouldn't want to go through this major subdivision process? Would we be forcing the property owners to do 10-acre parcels because they can't afford to go through the DOT roads? Does that make sense? Are we encouraging, with this particular language, are we encouraging property owners
Only
who,
10 acres.
to, I mean, am I making sense?
You're
So
making
it-
sense to me, yes. And you said like, it wasn't restricting rights, it was restricting their development.
Potential.
Potentials and options, and their bottom line.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because overall, we're really not looking to do that. We're looking for a safety, for really this to be a safety clause to stop what we're seeing on Tulse Creek Road, Puddin Ridge Road, that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. So I may not use the right term, property rights, but I'm concerned about it as it stands, the language.
Well, we need to figure out how we can give them some direction to kind of come up with some language.
Why can't we adopt it? Why can't we adopt, just like DOT does, why can't we adopt the name, the definition of the roads? Why can't they be adopted within this?
They absolutely could be.
You mentioned traffic count as well.
And, I mean, then that would kind of allow,
My only concern with just saying, however DOT defines, say a subdivision road, you don't ever have, it doesn't apply to a subdivision road. Well, then you could have a lot of lots on that subdivision road that may not necessarily be the safest point of access for those lots. Because we've got subdivision roads, when you add up all the lots, that have lots of lots stripped out on them. So I'm not sure. I think the traffic count is a good idea. I think that's a measurable, quantitative thing that we can use. But we have to know what you're looking for.
I would say for right now, for major subdivisions not to be included in the language, and just say that the traffic count to looking for language to include the traffic count.
well, I'm sure that DOT
the
has a
minors.
traffic count.
Of all of their, well, I don't know about all, but I would say the majority of the roads.
Because we don't know what the number is from one road that changes from a major thoroughfare to I don't know that.
So we would clarify that major subdivisions can strip out 5 lots along a road and then put in the internal road for the rest of their lots. Is that what I'm understanding?
I would not say that to be encouraged. I would just say that we leave major subdivisions out of the language that we're,
Well, that's then what it creates. Then you could strip out your 5 minor subdivision lots along the road, put in your internal road, and then bring the rest of the lots off of that. By not including major subdivisions, that's what would happen.
I don't think that's a good idea at all.
no, that's not what we intend to happen. So,
We're
our
looking at
intent
it
would
as
be
one
for a
case
major
by case.
subdivision to not be able to do that unless it was platted that way originally. That they could not start with a minor and then turn it into a major. It would have to be platted as a major subdivision from day one.
So a major subdivision from day one, new major subdivision from day one, if they platted 5 lots stripped out along the road and bring in their internal road, that's meeting what you're requesting.
Do the commissioners not have to review all major subdivisions
If they're
less
20
than-
lots or less, they do not,
If they're
unless one of the adequate public facilities that we
Right.
practice.
I would say that we would need the commissioners to be reviewing anything, any major subdivisions that's stripped out along the highway.
But that's the problem. We're trying to define a highway.
Well, not, you're doing away with 20 lots or less not getting reviewed by the commissioners. So if they see that it's not satisfactory to put lots in that area, they're going to say, no, you can't put lots in that area.
So it's looking at it as a case-by-case development.
If they're going to try to put lots on the,
But then
on
that
the road.
opens that up to that subjective thing that.
Yeah, I don't think that, yeah, it should be clear cut. That's not clear cut at all, to me.
Well, I think
We're
it can
passing the
be-
buck.
I think it can be clear cut.
I live off Tolls Creek Road. I see it every day. I mean, I see that where that subdivision is every day, those houses. It's a mess. I mean, there's no way that should be allowed. I mean, period to me. It shouldn't be allowed.
I think it really should be a traffic count. I mean, in a subdivision, on a dead-end road, I mean, I think that there's got to be some flexibility, or at least some way to be able to realistically apply this everywhere, but with having a count.
Right, and that would, the traffic count
I
would do that.
honestly believe if safety is your issue, then it should, it shouldn't be a blanket. Because this doesn't apply.
Well, not only, to Juanita's point, traffic count's important, but also speed of the speed limit on the road is important,
That's
because
true.
you've got East Ridge, and there may not be a lot of traffic on that road, but they can be going very fast there, and you don't want driveways coming around a corner. There's 3 driveways. So I think if we can get with the way DOT defines certain types of roads, so we really know the criterion that's set, that's at least a starting point. Because the way on the first page of the agenda item, it says, it will also limit minor subdivisions from stripping out along existing NCDOT maintained roads. If we can, within that language, get it very specific as to what types of roads we're talking about, then I think that might give us at least a starting point as to keep it consistent.
And my question would be, does the type of road matter? Because if it is, let's say, one of the road types says that you can strip the lots out, but the average daily traffic count indicates that you should. Does it matter what type of road it is? And I'm just thinking out loud.
Right, I know. And my answer would be, it may.
Yeah, right. And
So I'm a little confused on how to move forward here.
I think, and I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, that we table it tonight.
Okay.
The board, we need feedback from you. We need to know how you want to proceed. Do you want it to be a blanket with an average daily traffic count? We'll come back to you with different roads that you'll be familiar with and say, okay, if it's East Ridge Road, this is the daily traffic count. If it's Sanderson, well, it won't be Sanderson, that hasn't been DOT long enough. But if it's another road, Bells Island Road, maybe it's okay. We'll show you what the daily traffic trip generation is for those roads, and you can go from there. But
Okay. Maybe we can email you and try to
Yeah.
simplify some language.
and decide if you want this to apply to major subdivisions or not.
I think the problem we're having with that is the 20 lots. I was not completely aware that there was 20 lots that don't get reviewed by commissioners.
Yeah, the commissioners chose to amend the ordinance. It might have been the ordinance before this one, to not require that more extended review, we'll say, for lots that were 20, subdivisions that were 20 or less lots. They wanted staff to review, or technical review committee to review those.
Well, with that said then, I'll open the floor for a motion.
Lori has a comment,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Excuse
We
me.
have,
ahead.
while we're here in this middle of this conversation, 2016, that is the latest that I could find of DOT, ADT maps, average daily trips, or annual AADT, annual average daily trip maps, and I can send you all the link to that, and we can maybe start a discussion over email just to get some ideas going, and you can look at these and see. And they're not the easiest to read, so maybe we'll go through that.
Okay.
And you said the most recent was 2016?
That's what I found right here on just Googling and being on NCDOT's website. And the 10 minutes we've been discussing it.
Do you know how often they're updated?
Every couple of years, typically.
Yeah, because that already sounds out of date.
We work with the best data we
I
we
understand.
have.
I understand.
I think some roads are updated every year. But not all roads are updated every year.
Makes sense.
All right. Well, I'll open the floor for a motion.
So your motion is to table it for 30 days?
We can. I'll make a motion to table it until next month, and
While we proceed to,
while we proceed to discuss this with staff and see if we can narrow down some language and how to classify the streets and stripping out along the highways. How to restrict that.
okay.
So that would be my motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes, and we'll talk about that next month. All right. PB 1915, Windswept Pines. A request to conditional zone 66.8 acres from conditional mixed residential district to conditional mixed residential district to add 14 residential lots, streets, add one 2,500 square foot commercial building, and modify phases in the Windswept Pines development located on the north side of Baxter Road in Moyock, tax map 9H, parcel 4258, 1 through 12, and OSA-OSC and tax map 9, parcels 6A and 11L, Moyoc Township.
Thank you, Mr.
Follow.
Chairman. It's a lot of properties, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So this application you have before you was submitted by the property owners of Windswept Pines. That's the reason for the number of parcels. Because this is a conditional zoning application that involves the entire development, it includes those properties that have already transferred. And it basically is to modify the development plan. Property is located in Moyoc. It is on the north side of Baxter Lane, and predominantly the property is on the east side of the railroad right-of-way. There is a small about an acre and a half lot that is located between the railroad right-of-way and Currituck Highway that is designated for commercial use. The residential uses are located in this area. It also included one parcel that was located in a prior subdivision that was recombined to provide access off of Baxter Lane. So all of the property owners are part of the request. As I mentioned, the property is already zoned CMXR, which is Conditional District Mixed Residential, and this is to change the development plan, not necessarily the district, but with conditional zoning, it is a new request. It has to come back before you as such. Properties to the north are identified as low-density residential, wooded areas. There's some farmland, all of which are zoned either general business or agricultural. Properties to the east of the development, farmland with some low-density residential, also zoned agricultural. To the south of the project, low-density residential, some farm fields across the street, all zoned agricultural. Properties to the west would go across the highway, general business. There, the Moyoc Cemetery is located there. Some small commercial areas, vacant lands, all zone general business. The 2006 land use plan classifies this property as rural, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this as we go through this presentation. But just to familiarize yourself with that, this is the rural designation. Full service is located to the west of this project and south of this project. The Moyoc Small Area Plan does show this as full service, and we'll talk about the difference of these two as we go through the presentation. The proposed development site involves, as I mentioned, this commercial tract here. They currently have approval for one 2,500 square foot commercial building. They are proposing a second with this application. Phase 1 development is already recorded. Phase 2 development, which has just recently been recorded, includes the stormwater ponds for that section. And this is the area that is being added at this time. It is an expansion of the stormwater ponds and 14 new residential lots. Prior applications has shown this area as future development. Just to give you a little bit more on the background, this project was actually started in 2015, and at that conditional rezoning established 59 lots, and that was phases 1 and 2, and this commercial area. A 2018 application added this expansion of stormwater for phase 2. They were still showing this as future development area. And at this point, I don't know if you remember or not, we talked about that, and we knew that they were going to be bringing forth a new application at some point. We just didn't know when. That when is now. And they are proposing to develop that future area, 14 residential lots. So that brings the total up to 73. It will also modify the phasing for the development just by adding in phase 3, and that will go in obviously after Phase 2 and before the commercial area. It includes road extensions to the east and to the north, which is required by ordinance. They have one here as well. May or may not develop, but it is there. The additional 14 lots does have an impact on the committed school capacities that are identified in your packet. In your packet, you have a new table on page 1 that you haven't seen before. It is the adequate public facilities table. It identifies each one of the school's service areas or district areas. We grouped together the elementary schools based on, that's found on page 20. The schools based on their service areas. The Moyock service areas include the Moyock Elementary, Shawboro Elementary, Central Elementary. Lower Currituck includes the grouping of Griggs Elementary and Jarvisburg Elementary. And then the middle schools are grouped together because the district lines could change, and the high schools are grouped together as well. What that shows is the actual school capacities, and that's based on the 2021 classroom standards that will be implemented 2021. What it does is it reduces classroom sizes in the K through 3 grades and adjusts some of the others and actually establishes a ratio for the other grades as well. That actually had some impact on our percentage of capacity. It increased it some. And when you add the committed capacity, that's everything that's been approved since 1994, excluding exempt subdivisions and minor subdivisions. It shows you where you are with your committed capacity if everything were built out tomorrow. We all know that won't happen, but it is a planning tool, and then it shows where we're at. The proposed change of the 14 lots will increase that capacity by 3 elementary students, 1 middle school student, and 2 high school students. Where we get that average from, or where we get that ratio from, is the student generation rates that were established several years ago and is shown to be true. We track it each year to make sure that the rates are where they should be and that they're still good numbers and they're shown to be true. But again, that is a new table you see in your packet, and we will continue to provide that to you with each application. There was a community meeting held for this project on May 13th. There was a small number of property owners that attended that meeting. The engineer was able to review the proposed development plan and update the people in attendance with the approval process. With your application, there are sample elevations of proposed residential home construction. The applicant has also conditioned this as part of the zoning conditions and will be implemented as part of the approval, should the board approve this application. I want to go over with you the breakdown of the proposed changes from the concept plan, the current plan and proposed plan, and what the modification means. Again, there were 59 lots approved on the current plan. They are proposing to increase by 14, bringing the total up to 73 residential lots. On the current plan, there was 1 2,500 square foot commercial building. They are now proposing 2. The current plan had a development area of 51.32 acres, which excluded the future development area, which was about 15 acres. The proposed plan now includes it, excludes the 1.4 acre commercial area because that's completely separate and not a part of the residential density allocation. When you look at those numbers, the density per acre will go from, if you look at just the development area, 1.149 dwelling units per acre to 1.162 dwelling units per acre. Now, there is a drop because you're adding acreage, but in reality, it's really going from 0.9 to 1.116. So there is a slight increase in the overall development density. Open space acreage is an increase because we're adding more land area to it as well. It goes from 17 to 24. And we're showing on there the increase in school students that will be generated from this request. There's also associated infrastructure improvements, the stormwater, streets, sidewalks, utilities, and buffers that will be proposed in this phase as well. And as I mentioned, amending the phasing for this project. The proposed zoning conditions, which are presented by the applicant, there's no change in their proposed zoning conditions. It will stay subdivision use. All lots will be greater than or equal to 20,000 square feet. They will install a new culvert under Baxter's Lane to improve off-site drainage, size to be determined after engineering evaluation. That's actually been completed, but we will keep that as a condition in the request. Explore the possibility of routing a portion of the stormwater runoff to the northeast. That is included in this application. I'll probably let the engineer, who's more qualified in stormwater than me, go through that, but a portion of that does naturally drain to the north. And all residential development will be single family and will conform to the sample building elevations as provided, which were the ones that we showed there. Now, to the complicated part of this request. It all seems simple until we start talking about the land use plan and the small area plan. So the land use plan, the 2006 CAMA adopted plan, is the plan for the entire county. Then, in 2014, the county decided to approve a MOYOC small area plan. That small area plan identified a targeted area within the MOYOC community that they drilled down to find exactly how they wanted to see MOYOC develop. And in the past, staff has used the MOYOC small area plan as our guiding document. And when we use this as our guiding document and apply it to our Unified Development Ordinance, then it implements that plan. But earlier this year, the Board of Commissioners approved a rezoning request that basically put that emphasis on the 2006 land use plan, the CAMA adopted plan. So that's somewhat of a shift. It's major for us, but and it requires an additional step in the process to move projects forward if they are approved. So because that CAMA land use plan, that adopted plan, is the driven policy that we use, it affects how we use our Unified Development Ordinance and how we determine what's allowed and what's not allowed. So going back to that map, we showed the CAMA land use plan as a rural designation. And when you read into the land use plan, it talks about sub-areas and how certain areas should develop. It talks about the MOYOC sub-area as managing the urban level of growth that we will experience in that area with densities between 1 to 2 units per acre. So this particular project, remember we talked about densities. The density here is just over 1 unit per acre. The rural land use classification has no density allocation, but the MOYOC sub-area does. The MOYOC small area plan shows this area's full service. So as MOYOC determined how they wanted to see themselves develop, they showed that area's full service and has a density allocation of 1.5 to 3 units based on the surrounding land uses. So it could fluctuate. So when we shift that emphasis to the 2006 land use plan, the rural designation, so if this rezoning gets approved and it employs the 14 additional lots, we still have that rural land use plan designation. When we try to implement that in the Unified Development Ordinance, which is the regulating document, there's no density that's allowed there. under the rural land use classification. So even though we may find it to be consistent with the MOYOC sub-area policy, we haven't fixed this problem. So the way to fix that is our General Assembly has basically allowed for decisions, rezoning decisions, legislative decisions, to automatically update a land use plan as long as the motion is made properly that includes that language. Proper advertisement has been made that's required by the general statutes for amending your land use plan, and you've gone through the process for it to be reviewed by the Division of Coastal Management. So what we're presenting to you tonight is an amendment to the zoning map that also includes an amendment to the land use plan. Because we find that the MOYOC small area plan, if we implement that, the land use plan would then be consistent. So hopefully I didn't make that too confusing and bore you too much with all that
I think we got it.
policy stuff. But so as I mentioned, when we place that emphasis on the 2006 land use plan, the rural land use designation applies. The UDO residential density is provided for full service and limited service designations and not the rural designation. And so we have to amend that to achieve the development density. And our recommendation is for approval. And with that, we recommend that the 2006 land use plan also be amended and recognize that it implements the full service designation on the MOYOC small area plan that was adopted by the Board of Commissioners. And it is reasonable and in the public interest because it does demonstrate the changed conditions that were acknowledged in the 2014 MOYOC small area plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for staff? All right. Thank you. All right, is there anyone here present to represent this case tonight?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm Mark Bissell, and I'm representing the developer on this. I think Ms. Valava did a very thorough presentation, so I'm going to make my comments very brief. Essentially, we're taking 14 acres of property that was not part of the development plan and requesting the addition of 14 lots on that 14 acres. The development pattern is the same as the first two phases. The lot size is the same type of house will be developed, same type of, just an expansion of the same type of stormwater management facilities. And then, we have a kind of an awkward shaped piece of property out on the highway for commercial development, and it's almost an acre and a half and was only approved for one 2,500 square foot building, which we thought was grossly underutilized, so we studied it and found a way to put a second 2,500 square foot building on there, so that is also part of this request. And that is it in a nutshell, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? I think we're good.
Thank you.
All right, I'll now open the floor for public comment. If there's anyone here who wishes to speak on this item tonight. I have one person signed up right now. Mike? Yeah, please state your name and address for the record.
I'm I'm Mike Ranke. I live at 121 Parish Point Lane there, which is in Phase 1 along the left-hand side there by the pond by Currituck Highway. I got 2 points. One, coming off of Baxter's Lane there, as you add in the neighborhood and you keep expanding it to the east there, is there a plan, or was there ever considered a plan to put a secondary road in that comes in that way? Because there's one entrance into the neighborhood that hooks right. It's getting pretty congested there, especially as you get through Phase 1. The second one there is, quite honestly, for most of us back there, relatively news that 1.5 acre strip of land is already approved for a building. I guess that was done well before we got there. There's one approved. What is that building for? And what is the second building going to be? Because as you look at that, most of us who live in Phase 1 have a nice pond, have a nice view of the sun setting over there. What is that going to be used for? What is the purpose of it? How is it beneficial to Moyock and the people of Windswept Pines? How is that adding any sort of value to a community that, quite frankly, likes the land and the view out there? So I hope I didn't put too much in one spout, but just a couple things. If someone wants to address them, I can stay here or go back if you need me to. But if we could address the road, if there was ever a road considered going in there, and then we'll move over to if anybody has an answer for the commercial development there along Currituck.
Sure. We'll give them a minute to respond. And
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. I'm glad to try to answer those questions.
yes, sir.
First of all, no, there was never a plan to provide a second entrance to the property because there really is no other way to connect to Baxter Lane. We've always shown future connectivity to the east and north. We had one connectivity road shown with this particular development plan. We have the opportunity to do 2 connectivity roads. So eventually, I'm sure there'll be a connection to maybe a different collector street. But this property, as you can see, has no other opportunity to make a connection. As far as the commercial development, the property out front was actually zoned commercial before we started this project. And so that's always been a commercial parcel. It was incorporated into the tract as part of the MXR, which was actually downgraded the allowable commercial uses for that property. And there has always been a commercial use shown there. As far as what specific uses there are, we don't know yet. The target is neighborhood commercial type uses. Uses that would be beneficial to and used by the residents of the community. For example, a dry cleaner, say, just office and retail uses, service uses, those kinds of things, but no specific plans at this time.
All right. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak tonight? Sure. Could you please state your name and address for the record?
Lisa Ranke, 121 Parish Point, his
Thank
wife. I guess we've never been through this process before, so I'm just kind of curious. Like, we are lot 58. We back right up to that pond, and we honestly, until this came forward, I didn't even know that land wasn't going to stay what it was. I didn't know that there was even approval for one house to go there. We were never made aware of that during our process, so we're just wanting to get our opinion stated here that we don't want a second building to be put on that little stretch of land. It's our yards, and then a pond, and then the train tracks, and then this portion. So I see there's probably nothing we can do about it, that there's already approval for one building to be there. We just want it stated that we don't want a second one. And as far as the 14 houses are there, we're, as a community, just worried that it just keeps building. We just keep doing more phases, and everything flows through that front part of the neighborhood, And if they're just going to keep building more and more phases, that we're worried that there's too much coming through that little portion. And this, I mean, there's the speeding, there's the construction trucks and everything, that we would just like it put on the record that we don't, us personally, we don't want it to keep having additional phases if there isn't some other way for everyone to get in and out of the neighborhood.
Sure. And it looks like they don't, at this time, have another option to put a road out, or they probably would, but they have left 2 dead-ended roads for that potential to happen when it becomes available in the future. It's what it looks like.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Anyone have any questions? Is there anyone else here that would like to speak that's not signed up tonight? All right.
A question. My name is Tina Vandorf, and we're right next to Lisa and Mike. And I know that there's 2 proposed.
Could you come and
Sure.
tell your
Access.
name and address for the record?
I'm sorry, Tina Vandorf, 123 Parish Point
Thank you.
Lane. The very top, my understanding when we purchased our house too is there was not going to be anything being built behind us, so we were not properly communicated to when we purchased our house. We just moved in 3 weeks ago. So, and then the other information that we were given is the potential new or potential future exit completely north on Parish Point. That is all a private property driveway back there that will never be expanded back there. So that was also something we were communicated to. I'm not sure what the other potential over to the west and to the north, what area that is, if that can ever be an exit or an entrance to the neighborhood. But there will be a lot of congestion. There's a lot of small kids in the neighborhood, and there is a lot of traffic. So it is a concern of mine when you have a lot of kids in the neighborhood and there's only one entry and exit to the neighborhood. So.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Are there any questions or discussion at this time? Anyone? Hearing none, I will open the floor for a motion. I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion on this. I'll motion to approve PB 19-15 as is presented with the agreed upon conditions of approval and the consistency statements that this conditional zoning request is consistent with and amends the 2006 land use plan by designating this property as full service on the future land use map because the amendment recognizes and implements the full service designation of the Moyoc Small Area Plan adopted by the Board of Commissioners. It is reasonable and in the public interest because it is required by change conditions acknowledged by the Moyoc Small Area Plan and addresses a demonstrated community need, providing a full-service area that offers mixed-use development with both residential and commercial components. Does that cover the
It does.
concerns by staff? And again, the agreed-upon conditions that are listed on page 24. That's the motion I got.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. All right. Does anyone have any announcements?
Mr. Chairman,
is that
before
it
we
for
move forward,
tonight?
I'd like to let the people who in attendance know
Absolutely.
that generally this goes to the first meeting, the first Board of Commissioners meeting of the month, which is the first Monday of the month. Due to the fact that this has to be advertised a little differently, it will go to the third Monday of the month, their Board of Commissioners meeting, which will meet in this room. Should get a notification in the mail? Yes. Letters will be mailed to all the property owners. And that's the official action. This is a recommending body to the elected officials. Did you have a question?
That was my question.
Okay.
So that would be our next step. It is like, this is just the recommendation. The next meeting would be where.
That's the decision-making board, correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all we have for tonight? Does anyone have any announcements they'd like to make?
The Board of Commissioners will be holding a work session on the dune protection ordinance at their July 15th meeting. That work session will be at 4 p.m. We will present what we heard, what county staff heard from the stakeholders about some of the things that they would like to see. Then we will get direction from the Board of Commissioners on if we're going to pursue that or our next steps, because some of the requested information would be significant staff time. So we will update you all with the direction we receive from that work session.
Thank you. I have one announcement. I'd like to, for anybody that doesn't know, Miss Valova, I believe her son just got drafted to the Yankees, so if anybody wants to congratulate her on your way out,
Congratulations.
that's all I have. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.